Part 9. There's Trouble Ahead. James woke early Saturday morning. He hadn't slept well, his mind filled with events from the previous night. She's a little unreasonable, he thought, as he opened the front door and picked up the crumpled newspaper lying on his porch. I'll have to speak to that newspaper boy, he murmured, as he pieced the newspaper back together. He scanned the first couple of pages for headlines and moved on to the business section. This was his normal routine. Firstly the headlines, then the business section, and finally the sports section. He wouldn't make the sports section today. Forensic Accounting Investigation at Chevalier's, read the headline in the first column of the business section. Jesus! He exclaimed. He dropped the newspaper onto his kitchen work surface and picked up the phone and called Vince. Morning, Vince. It's James. When you get this message, please call me right away. I'm at home. As James finished his last sentence, Vince picked up the phone. Jimbo, what a surprise. How can I help you? Said Vince, smiling to himself. Vince, have you read today's newspaper? Said James, ignoring his irritation at being called Jimbo. It's a bit early for that, Jimbo. Well, let me read you mine, said James. Shares are set to drop at upmarket fashion house Chevalier's after news was leaked that the world-renowned clothing and accessory designer had called in forensic accounting specialists. God damn! Exclaimed Vince. Any idea who leaked this? He added. None at all, said James, scanning the article for clues. Can we meet today, say in an hour? Said Vince. In the office, 9:30. See you there, replied James. James picked up his car from Riley's and met Vince at 9:30. Vince wasn't his usual affable self. He continually paced as they discussed the investigation and the item in the press. Do you have any idea what's happening here? Said Vince. Well, we know that inventory manipulation is part of it. We also know that only 8 employees have high-level access to the computer systems that control the inventory. We know that goods evaporate, replied James. Beyond that, I can't say. I can only theorise, and that's no good until I have further information, he added. Go ahead and theorise then, said Vince. I believe that a person or a group of individuals are stealing goods. It's more likely to be a group because it would need the cooperation of others to enable the perpetrators to move goods in such quantities. The problem is that we have only just discovered the inventory manipulation, and I can't help you any more until I call in a computer expert. Whoever is behind this is very clever at covering their tracks, and would appear to have circumvented various security protocols embedded in the software. This might be a shot in the dark, but I also think that whoever leaked this information to the press may have a part to play in the whole scheme, said James. How do you mean? Said Vince. Well, I came across something like this at Norcross Steel some years ago. Not quite the same, because they weren't so heavily computerised, but similar. Certain parties conspired to depress the stock price. They intended to launch a bid at rock-bottom prices, but we caught them, said James. Who instigated that? Said Vince. James watched Vince and said nothing until Vince stopped pacing. Well, said Vince agitatedly. The president of the company, said James, studying Vince. There was a silence while the two men observed each other. What do we do now? Said Vince. It would seem that you have your work cut out next week pacifying stockholders. I suggest you issue a statement to the Sunday press denying the seriousness of the problem so as not to start a mass exodus of shareholders. Do the same for the national dailies. I need a list of current stockholders from the registrar. It may help, but I don't hold out too much hope, because whoever is behind this will be too cute to show themselves, but we may get lucky. In the meantime, with your permission, I will draft in an expert to see if we can make sense of the software systems, replied James. Go ahead, whatever it takes. Do it now, Vince said firmly. OK, we've both got our work cut out. One thing, though, Vince paused. Any idea how long this will take? How long's a piece of string? I just don't know. Maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, could even be a couple of months. I know we're under pressure to solve the problem, but I can't give you times until the computer guru arrives. The meeting concluded. James left a message for his old Harvard friend Greg Anderton to call him as soon as possible. Greg had set up his own computer consultancy business 8 years previously and counted several Fortune 500 companies as his clients. Greg called back at 11 a.m. and James briefed him on the situation. Greg would arrive in LA on the following Tuesday. Till then, James would continue with the endless task of poring over the stock control paperwork. James called Angela at lunchtime without success. He decided to call round to her apartment upon leaving work. His mind had flitted between his work and Angela throughout the day. By 5 p.m. he'd had enough and decided to leave work and head for the car park beneath the building. He opened his car door, took off his jacket and laid them both out over the back seat. As he stood up, he noticed the rear of the gunmetal grey Porsche 911 Cabrio belonging to John Walters. Curious, he thought. James hadn't seen John in the office. Maybe he'd left the car there for the weekend, he mused. James was too concerned about his relationship with Angela to waste time thinking about John Walters. He was quite pleased that he hadn't bumped into him in the office. John really wasn't his type. Far too smarmy, thought James. He called Angela on both lines again without success, but resolved to swing by her apartment in any case. Angela had agreed to look at Tate's designs at 2 p.m. that Saturday, and Tate duly arrived and buzzed for Angela. She waited for a short time and finally slipped into the building when someone came out. She found Angela semi-conscious in the doorway of her apartment, unable to communicate. Tate pulled Angela into the lounge and managed to lift her onto the sofa. She'd seen this many times before on the music circuit with Mars, a cocktail of drugs and alcohol which rendered the user totally incapable, apart from a few incomprehensible grunts and murmurs.
Chasing your turning, driving your burning, hallucinations and cheap red wine, drugs of polluters, endless abusers, all our lives they were sacrifice.
As the afternoon progressed, Tate managed to ply Angela with fluids and Angela began to recover. "I'll see you later and we'll talk," said Tate, once she felt convinced Angela wasn't in danger of slipping back into a drug-induced coma. "I'll be back around 9, she added. "Take the spare keys and a pass," murmured Angela, as she lay in bed feeling totally exposed to Tate. "Okay, lovely. See you later," said Tate. Angela smiled weakly, and Tate closed the door and left. "Tate!" called out James. "Tate! Tate!" he called again. Tate stopped dead in her tracks. "James, how lovely to see you," said Tate. "What are you doing here?" she added. "I was going to ask you the same question," said James, smiling back at Tate. "I'm here to see Angela," he added, staring up at the apartment block. "How strange. I didn't know she lived here as well," she said. "As well as who?" asked James innocently. "Just a girlfriend," said Tate happily. "You must call in and see Angela sometime. You girls get on so well," he continued. "It's great to see you. May see you at the bar later." "Wonderful. Bye, James. Bye." Tate waved her hand as she walked away from James. Ditzy. Completely ditzy. They deserve each other, James thought. He shook his head and smiled as he thought of his friend Mars, the lunatic, and his ditzy wife Tate. James pressed the buzzer for Angela's apartment and waited. Tried again and left. He thought about driving to Raleigh's, but decided to go for a jog to clear his mind first. Tate arrived at Raleigh's at 6:30. "Everything all right?" said Mars. "Did she like your designs?" "Can't talk now. Things aren't too good. I've got to see her later. She's, not well. Not well at all. But don't tell James anything. I'll explain later," said Tate. Raleigh's was busy. Sandra had become Raleigh's unofficial new chef and was enjoying it immensely. The patronage, too, was very different from the previous night. Families and couples had replaced the excitement of the music and the frivolities of the previous evening. This pleased Mars, as he'd realised that the bar would not survive purely on one big night each week, and he knew things would slow down during the week. It took until almost 7:30 that evening before Mars and Tate were able to take a short break to talk about the events of the previous afternoon. Tate explained the situation with Angela, and they both agreed that she should return to ensure that Angela was fine. Mars listened intently, and they both agreed not to mention the incident to James. As Tate left Raleigh's, James walked in. "We meet again," he said, smiling at Tate. "Twice in one day. A record," said Tate as she wistfully sidestepped James and made her way out of the bar. "May see you later?" asked James. "Wonderful, wonderful. Look forward to it," added Tate, as she waved with her back to James and made her way to the car. In a flash, she was gone. James smiled and shook his head. "She's always in such a rush and away with the fairies," he thought. "James, old chap, great to see you. Take a seat and tell me what's happening," said Mars as he poured James a light beer. "How do you know I wanted that?" Instinct, my friend, instinct, said Miles, smiling back. Are you all right, Miles? Asked James, and added, You haven't had another falling out with Tate by any chance? No, nothing of the sort. Tate and I are fabulous. The bar's going great, and we're both chuffed to bits with everything, said Miles, making a wild gesture with his arm towards the seating area. Sandra's doing a marvellous job, and we've been packed all day. Why would you think I have a problem? You seem kinda jumpy. You're not doing that musician thing with... James leaned forward and whispered, Drugs? Miles fell about laughing. Drugs? No, and started laughing again. I think I need something stronger than this, said James, taking a mouthful of beer and swallowing it. What's up? Said Miles, looking concerned. Where do I start? Said James, looking down at the bottle between his hands. Work is, let's just say, interesting. Angela is not interested, he added. Don't say that, replied Miles. A woman would never storm out in a huff if she weren't interested, said Miles, trying to be helpful. It's not just that, she's different. 1 minute I think I know her, and then I don't. James paused thoughtfully.
I didn't know you at all. I didn't know you at all. I thought you were something blue and cold. I'm your fool, you fool. What do I do? What do I say? How do I feel? Sad, lonely, lonely, lonely. Where do I go? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Lost without you, God, help me.
I wouldn't normally tell anything like this to anyone, but I've never met anyone so difficult to read. She drives me crazy. She affects everything I think about and everything I do. I'm even finding it difficult to focus on my work. That's love, said Miles knowingly. You think so? Murmured James. Sure, replied Miles. There's something else about Angela, but I can't put my finger on it, added James. How do you mean? Said Miles. James took several seconds racking his brains to vocalise his thoughts. When I'm with her, she makes me feel like I'm the only man in the world and we're so alive. Then she can switch me off as if I don't exist. She has me in the palm of her hands and then, poof, she's gone, and everything is maybe. I shouldn't bore you with this, but... No probs, I'm interested. Most women can be difficult at some point, said Miles helpfully. I just don't know her. That's it. In a nutshell, I just don't know her, concluded James. You say work is interesting, inquired Miles, changing the subject. James got out of his seat and walked to the end of the bar, where there was a rack of daily newspapers that Miles provided for the clientele. I'm not divulging anything you can't read for yourself, so I'm not breaking any client confidentiality, said James, turning to the business section. Read this, he said, gesturing to the column inches devoted to the Chevaliers. Miles read the column. So, said Miles, looking up at James. You are conducting an investigation, so what's the big deal? The big deal, as you put it, is that this is supposed to be a quiet investigation. There are only 3 of us conducting the investigation. The reason there are only 3 of us is so that we don't make lots of noise. And then, news like this shouldn't hit the papers. Someone inside the company has leaked this information. To make matters worse, there are only 8 people within the company who have the possibility of carrying out this fraud, and one of them is Angela, said James, staring at his bottle. Do you know something? Said James. What? Replied Miles, deep in thought. You are the only barman in the world who gives a customer a bottle without a glass. Miles laughed. At least you've still got a sense of humour. You're going to need one too when Pat finds out what you've done to this place, said James, grinning. Good God, I'd forgotten about him. Don't remind me. I've got to phone him tomorrow to let him know how things are going, said Miles, scratching his head. What are you going to tell him? Inquired James, picking at the label on his bottle. Nothing, said Miles. Absolutely nothing. Tate let herself into Angela's apartment and was surprised to find Angela in sparkling mood. Hi, Tate. I see you left your designs. I really like them, particularly these. Angela pointed to the pile of designs to her right and began sifting through them. "Angela, about earlier," said Tate, but Angela stopped her before she could continue. "Tate, you are such a sweetheart, but what happened was an accident. The doctor gave me some migraine pills and they didn't agree with the bottle of wine I drank. I really owe you a debt of gratitude for your help. Thank you so much." Tate wasn't convinced. She felt that Angela had stage managed her arrival and that her firm tone was contrived. "What's going on, Angela?" "I don't know you very well, but I do know what I saw, and I'm not convinced it was an accident. I don't think you're being very open with me." Tate would have continued, but Angela rose from her chair, her face like thunder. "You can't come into my apartment accusing me of being an addict, pretending to be my friend when I hardly know you. Please leave." Angela strode towards the entrance to her apartment and beckoned for Tate to leave. Tate was astonished. She wanted to help. She wanted to argue, but decided to go. She picked up some designs and headed for the door. "I'll call you," said Angela as she shut the door firmly behind Tate. Angela stood behind the door for some time before sliding down the door, clasping her head between her hands, crying. She sat there for hours. Tate noticed that she was shaking when she put the keys into the ignition of her car. She sat for a while looking up at Angela's apartment window, wondering what she'd done to deserve her fate. Finally, she decided she would talk it through with Mars. She called Riley's and told Mars she was on her way back. "That was quick," said Mars. "Too quick. I'll be back in 15, babe," she said. When Tate entered Riley's, Mars and James were still deep in conversation. Tate was still deep in thought, but adjusted her composure and walked across to where James was sitting and sat next to him. James rose to his feet as Tate sat down. "Can I get you anything, babe?" said Mars, smiling at Tate. "Do we have any Bacardi?" said Tate, smiling back. "And Coke?" said Mars fondly. "How are you?" asked Tate to James. "Fine, I'm just fine," he lied. "Long time no see," he said. "Yes, it must be all of an hour," said Tate, looking at her watch and wondering how much James knew about Angela. "James was just telling me about his problems at work. It's very interesting stuff," Mars chipped in, trying to be helpful whilst realising that all was not well. "Really?" said Tate, trying to sound interested. Mars explained James's position as best he could, but the bar was beginning to fill and the band had arrived, so James finished his story where Mars left off. James and Tate talked for a long time, mostly about James's past, his work, and finally about Angela. James found Tate as easy to talk to as Mars and concluded that Tate wasn't quite as ditzy as he had originally thought. He wished that his relationship with Angela was as complete as Mars and Tate. It was gone 10 when James left Riley's. It had become difficult to talk above the noise in the bar, and James decided to try Angela one more time. He was not successful, so he went home. James wandered across to his answering machine and checked for messages. "Hi, darling. It's me, Angela. I haven't been feeling very well, and that's why I haven't been in touch. I'll speak to you Monday." James felt a lot better. It bothered him that Angela wasn't well, but at least she was in contact. He walked across to his briefcase, pulled out a couple of folders, emptied the contents onto the granite surface in his kitchen, and started perusing the documents. Tate's mobile phone first rang at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. She ignored it. Mars didn't even stir. It then rang every 15 minutes until she finally answered it at 9. "Hi, Tate." It was Angela, and she continued. "I'm so sorry for the way I behaved. I'm sorry if I woke you up. I'm sorry about everything. I didn't mean to be like that. You were so good to me. I can't believe I treated you like that." Angela gushed her apology as if her life depended upon it. She certainly sounded very sincere, and Tate was completely taken aback. "Please come over. Please talk to me. Your work is very good, and I do want to talk to you. You need an explanation. Please say you'll come over. I am fine now," said Angela. "I'll come. Sure, I'll be there. Give me an hour," replied Tate, melting as her mind analysed the tone in Angela's voice. "Sorry, babe. You're on your own with the bar for a while," said Tate as she kissed Mars on the cheek and left. Thank God for Riley's boys, thought Mars as he poured another coffee. If it weren't for the boys in blue, Mars would have had a mammoth job of tidying up Riley's that morning. Somehow Mars had managed to cajole his unofficial doorman to help out with the cleaning duties as well. He wondered how long it would be before he could take the chance of employing more staff. Still, it's a little unfair that I've organised a lie-in and she's going out to visit Angela, he thought. Miles decided to work on a new song and took his coffee into the studio. His mind was full of ideas, and he reflected on what he would later describe as his void period. He pulled out some paper from his back pocket and looked at some rough notes he'd made at Riley's. Palm of her hand, no, heart between her hands, sounds a lot better, he mused. Tate still had Angela's keys, but she didn't use them. Instead, she pressed the buzzer and Angela let her into the building. Angela was waiting by the lift as Tate walked out. She took Tate's hand and kissed her cheek. I can't tell you how sorry, but Tate stopped her. Look, Angela, you had your reasons. No need to apologise any more. I'm here to help, if you need me. Angela's eyes filled with tears as she ushered Tate into her apartment.
You think you're all alone. Your world is upside down. No matter what you do, so many people are loving you. Take another.
Once Angela started telling Tate about her life, she couldn't stop. Every now and again she would tell Tate that she had never told anyone about her problems before, and that there were still things she could never tell anyone. Tate listened intently, and other than a yes or no, or how awful, she found no reason to interject. At the end, Tate asked Angela about James. He's so wonderful, but I find I just can't trust him, said Angela, looking down at the floor. I know he really loves you, said Tate. You didn't mention anything to him about yesterday, said Angela, suddenly panic-stricken by the thought that their relationship might have been compromised. No, I've said nothing, lovely. It's your business, and I would never tell anyone. Angela smiled and put out her arms to hug Tate. Tate felt as though Angela was a little girl and hugged her. Her eyes glazed with tears as she felt the pain of her child.
You rest so with your mind. Your heart is losing out. Stop holding back, let go. Believe in yourself, let feelings show. Take another glass of wine before you go to sleep tonight. Tomorrow is another day, and everything will be just.
James had almost fallen asleep at the worktop in his kitchen when the doorbell rang. The work surface was strewn with papers and notes he'd been making all afternoon and into the earlier part of the evening. It was now 10 p.m. and the bell rang again. He rubbed his eyes and made his way to the front door. He was astonished to find Angela standing coyly on his porch. Don't just stand there, said James, beaming. Come in. You look beautiful. He led Angela to the lounge and sat beside her, holding her hand. How are you feeling? Are you better? What was wrong, or shouldn't I ask? Don't worry about me. I'm fine now. I thought I'd come round because I felt bad about running off the other night, she said seriously, tilting her head and batting her eyes, which James found very provocative. I was very worried, said James, clutching her hand. Can I get you a drink? He asked. Do you have hot chocolate? That's an unusual request, replied James, smiling, his heart pounding. I'm sure I'll find something. He walked out into the kitchen and poured out some milk into a pan, turned on the hob and started gathering up the papers from the worktop. Been working, have you? Said Angela, surveying the mass of papers lying across the surfaces from the doorway into the kitchen. Yes, it's unbelievable how much paperwork's involved in my business, laughed James. I'll keep an eye on the milk, shall I? Said Angela instantly. That would be great, replied James. As she walked across to the kitchen island where the hob was located, Angela picked up some paper that had fallen onto the floor. She glanced at it before placing it onto the surface from where it had fallen. It was handwritten. There were 8 names on it, all with question marks beside them. Angela could hardly fail to notice her own name. I'm not staying tonight, if that's what you're thinking, said Angela. The tone of her voice, her entire demeanour had changed. What the hell have I done now? Thought James. He decided not to rise to her mood swing and passed no comment. You busy tomorrow? He asked pleasantly. Why do you ask? Said Angela firmly. I thought you might have to get up for something special at work, replied James. What sort of something special would that be? Replied Angela inquiringly. I don't know, But you don't want to stay here tonight, so I naturally thought you might have a particularly early start or something, he gestured. What sort of something do you mean? Said Angela, digging further. I'm merely asking why you need to go home, I suppose, said James. He was getting exasperated, but tried to hide it. Why didn't you say that, then? Said Angela accusingly. I was being polite, that's all, replied James, and added, Why are you giving me such a hard time? Everything was great until you asked for hot chocolate. OK, I will stay, said Angela tritely. Make your mind up, why don't you? Thought James. Is that still OK by you? Said Angela. That would be great. Here's your chocolate, replied James, wondering why she'd changed her mind. Angela's frown disappeared from her face. She giggled, and once again James was lost. When James awoke Monday morning, Angela was gone. He called for her as he wandered out into the kitchen, still half asleep. He'd already prepared his filtered coffee before he caught sight of the note she'd left him. Dear Jimbo, had something to do this morning. See you later. Love, Angela. Kiss. At least I got love, murmured James, smiling at her humour.